Hello.
Hi.
This is a talk about aesthetics. That was the least aesthetic thing that we could have done.
I mean, this is about visual aesthetics, not audio aesthetics, so...
Yeah. Audio
Sorry.
people, you can just leave now. There's the door.
Sorry.
So we're closing the door now. We better get started because we've got a lot of stuff to do. I'm just going to see if we can do this.
Oh,
Can we?
Can we? Oh.
We're learning.
Yeah. You're a filter, bro. Okay. So, who are you, Mike?
Hi. I'm Mike Blackney, otherwise known as Kurt Russell Fan Club on Twitter, and Buttsney, also known as Buttsney occasionally. Oops. And who are you?
Oh, hi. My name's Izzy, and I'm Shrubette on Twitter. There's no reason for the tag. Anyway.
Okay, I'll introduce a little bit about me. I have been in the games industry for a little while. I'm pretty old, so I've done a lot of jobs as well as games industry. I started off getting into games by doing modding, and you can see up there, it's pretty dark. I'm just going to go and dim the lights. Dim?
What?
Did anything happen? oh, wait, is that the on?
Aesthetics.
Something's happening. I don't know.
I
like the kind of Deus Ex kind of lighting on the roof. Okay, so anyway, you can't really see the one in the bottom left corner. I started off with modding, and I was making Unreal Tournament 2004 levels, and that actually was my window into the games industry. So I started work at Transmission Games, and I was working on a really cool title called Sin City, and we were making it here in Melbourne, and we were so happy that we got that, and we put a lot of time into it, and it was looking really good, and then it got cancelled, and it was a real bummer. So I got put on Ashes cricket titles for a couple of years, and then International Cricket, the sequel, and I know nothing about cricket. So eventually, after being lumped on project after project, I got put on a flight sim, and then I got put onto a different studio, a Cleveland show game, which was, that's Cleveland, who's like a spin-off character. There's a spin-off show anyway, from the Family Guy. It was a terrible game, and so basically I just said, nah, this is it. I want to live in Melbourne, but I don't want to be in the kinds of games that we're doing here. So I taught for a few years while making stuff on the side. I also worked on a game called...
Is that not working? Oh, you might
not. Oh, I may have to click. Oh, I just clicked. I worked on a game called Antechamber. I didn't do it. Whenever I say that, people are like, oh my God, you made Antechamber. You're amazing. No, I didn't. I did the gun. I still worked on it. Yeah, but like, Alex Bruce is a really great dev, and he's a really great guy. And we went to uni together, and he was just like, listen, Mike, can you make me a gun? And I was like, yeah, I banged it out. And that was it. But I got to work on a great title, and I get to tell people that I did something on it, which is really awesome. And now I'm making a video game called Dead Static Drive. Thank you. And that's at the moment in development. It's going to be demoing here at PAX later this week. So if anyone wants to have a play, come past PAX Rising. I'm stand number 32. I just come past and say hi and have a shot. That's me.
Oh, God. Yay! Good mic. Okay, this is me. Hi, I'm Izzy. I take a lot of photos. I'm also a game developer, but I bring my camera everywhere. I mostly do color photos. So I take a lot of, I guess, photos of the games industry and things like that because I'm awful at remembering things. So I'm just like, I'm going to take a photo and then I can remember. Just, yeah. So I've been doing photography for like a number of years. Way too long. And, but I've been making a lot of like dumb games for also a long time, but this is probably my most, I guess, newest one called Intergalactic Space Princess, which I'm working on with Cherie Davidson. Don't know if she's in the audience. That's fine.
Cherie.
It's okay. But she's a fantastic producer, and she's straight from a Media Molecule, and she's a wonderful, wonderful person. And I can say all these nice things, and she's not in the room. It's fine. But before she stepped on, I was doing, I guess, everything on it. And now I'm just doing the art writing, design, and business stuff. So yeah, that's me. So, Mike.
Well, we're here to talk about aesthetics. I got a lot of thoughts. I got a lot of crazy thoughts that I just want to get out there to you. I'm no expert, right? I'm no, I just made a game that looks pretty and people say, I love the colors, right? But I want to talk about aesthetics because I want to give you some info on how I came to where I am and my attitudes. And because I'm nearly 40, right, I've got some stuff from my past that I might be able to kind of help you with. But the first thing you want to do when you're making a game, as far as I'm concerned, is to realize that you will have an aesthetic, right? You will have one. You have an aesthetic. Everything has an aesthetic, right?
Yep.
Right? So, what is it? Does this? Yeah. Oh. It's not just vaporwave. I mean, vaporwave is the aesthetic. We're done here. Everyone can leave.
What?
No, vaporwave is beautiful. It's perfect. It's wonderful. It's a joke, right? On the fact that aesthetic, we're too focused on visuals. It's also based on how cool and grungy the 90s were and how ugly some stuff was, and it's a celebration of that. Right, but this is a gorgeous aesthetic. But everything that you make has an aesthetic. Everything, right?
Even stuff you wear has an aesthetics.
Yeah.
Like 60s witch vibes.
Yeah, yeah. Or slightly too old for advice. Right? But we want to talk a little bit about standing out, right? So this thing about vaporwave, you talk about vaporwave, everyone's seen it already, right? We're done, okay? You can move on. You can do something else. Does this stand out? This stands out. It's beautiful. But the more that you repeat the same thing, the more you see vaporwave, the more you see any aesthetic, the more it becomes visual fatigue, right? People who are seeing it, who are at home, they see it, they see something that's beautiful. The number of beautiful knockoffs of World of Warcraft with the hand-painted style, right? You see it and your brain's already been killed from 400 hours of World of Warcraft. And they've spent so much energy on this beautiful game. They've invested so much money in making this gorgeous hand-painted artwork, and people at home, many of them just can't really get into it, especially after a few years of playing World of Warcraft, right? So standing out, right, a lot of the time just being different. But when we're talking about aesthetics, Cheap Unity Asset Store is an aesthetic, okay? You can be that. You don't have to choose it, but you can choose it, right?
We asked Andy. It's okay.
This is Andy Sum's game, and it's amazing. If you haven't played it, you should go out and play it. What is it? 7 day.
420 plays it. It's Game of the Year edition.
Yeah. yeah. It's incredible, right? And he's celebrating everything that makes that aesthetic ugly. But we've seen this before this game was made, and even after it, right, subsequent to it. We know this aesthetic because everyone's seen a knockoff 10-hour game published to Steam where someone was just trying to make a bit of cash. And they've got that aesthetic. They just didn't choose it. It chose them because they let it happen to them, right? Right. If you want to have an aesthetic for your game, if you want to stand out, the easiest way is to make sure that you make decisions about your game, right?
So one of my personal favorites, Wind Waker.
Yeah, Wind Waker is gorgeous. We're just going to show a couple of games that we think have standout aesthetics. Wind Waker, incredible. Limbo, incredible, right? It stands out, and nothing else was out there like it. And it's not expensive, it's cheap. It's cheap to do this kind of aesthetic. But the hard work is the thinking that happens before you make the art, right? It's not the art production that was the hard part here, it's the thinking. And thinking is a hard thing to do, so we don't want to do it. Journey, beautiful, right? Return of the Obra Dinn, gorgeous game designed in the theme of hypercard games from the 90s and old Mac classic games with 1 bit, right? It's either white or black and dithering everywhere, which is horrible, but it's amazing. Akami, Akami and Wind Waker are kind of the starters. They're like the seminal art games where people just said, look, I got to play this and I don't care if it's garbage, but I just want to see what this is like. I want to experience this. And there are so many gamers out there, and I don't think gamers have really caught up to this yet. So many gamers out there still say games are all about the mechanics, right? Games are all about how the rules work and the rules of play and what if I press this button, what happens, and it's got tight controls and all this. But games aren't just that. Games are a place you can be transported to, right? You can be inside of an anime. You can be inside of something gorgeous, this amazing, incredible world, without any mechanics at all, right? You can just be there. You can experience what it's like to be there. Plus, they had cool gameplay as well. But before that even happens, you can give people an experience that they couldn't have any other way. So I just encourage you to avoid the path of least resistance, right? The easiest thing you can do is use assets that are made already, or use a style that's made already for you, right? If you're going to choose to make a game that's got pixel art, why choose pixel art, right? Just engage with that decision, okay? Say, should I use pixel art? Should I use hand paint? Should I use textures, right? I'm making a game that doesn't have textures, and that saves me so much energy and so much time, but also gives me an aesthetic that's entirely different from some kinds of games.
And I'm making a game that basically I like to do a lot of my work at a cafe, and I always forget to bring my mouse, and the tablet is too bulky, so I like doing all my art with the touchpad. But it works, I think.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. I love Izzy's game.
Check it out at PAX, please. So one of the other examples, for example, is a lot of indie animation. Now, I don't know if a lot of you get much invested in watching a lot of shorts, but if you really want to have a look at a group of animators who just have so much style, check out a lot of independent animation, because each one of those short films absolutely stands out, and each one. But the problem is sorry. I'm nervous.
No, you're good. Now, okay, this is weird. I feel like I'd be remiss to actually mention that aesthetics aren't a solution, right? The problem is, if you're developing a game, how do you get it to stand out? How do you get people interested in your game? That is certainly a big problem when you're making games. And if you come up with an aesthetic that stands out, it's not a permanent solution, right? Not everyone can do that. Anyone who studied any economics will have been taught about the club lock versus LoJack issue. It's economists compare the two, and the issue revolves around negative externalities. Okay, there you go. It's a new term. I didn't know the name of it, but I've known this for a while. A club lock is a device that you can affix to your wheel of your car to stop people from stealing it. Okay. Because if someone jumps into the car and they want to steal the car, then they not only need to get the ignition started, but they need to deal with the fact that you've got this thing here stopping them from driving. Because when you turn the wheel, the lock hits the roof of the car. Okay, it makes it harder to drive. So you've got to get the lock off, or you need to somehow break it. Stops people stealing your car. Doesn't stop them stealing anyone else's car. Because if they're going to steal a car, they're just going to steal the one next to it. Okay, the negative externality. It's a negative issue affecting everyone else on your street when you buy a club lock, because it makes them more likely to be targeted by a thief. Okay, that's the issue of negative externalities, right? Whereas you compare a club lock to a LoJack. A LoJack is like a device that's about 10 times as expensive, but it's not advertised on the outside. It's an alarm system that calls the police as soon as your car gets started. Most cars that have LoJacks get recovered. Very few that have club locks and get stolen get recovered. And the other people on the street suffer for you having it. But it's more expensive, so people get the club lock, right? Now, to bring this back to games, if I have a cool aesthetic, it just means that people will focus on my game instead of someone else's game. Doesn't mean my game's any good, right? My game might be rubbish. Everyone who said, woo, at the start of this talk, many of you might not have even played my game, and it might be a terrible game. And that's not necessarily a thing that's great for society, but it's good for me because you know who I am. So as far as I'm concerned, we've got a few different scenarios here, right? I can tell you all to have a cool aesthetic, and you could all go off and make your own cool different aesthetic, and then suddenly everyone's games stand out, which would mean that no one's game stands out, except for the games that are good, that have cool ideas beyond the aesthetic, which would be a universal win for society, right?
Which is what indie animation is doing.
Yeah. Or alternatively, really smart, really creative ones of you might listen to this and learn something, and then your aesthetic is really good. and then good people get good things happen through them as well, which is also good. Ideally, I'd like every game to be a standout game. I'd like every game to stand out and to be bought and taken home. But yeah, I just wanted to say that because I think that there's more to games than aesthetics, but there's not too, right? Like a game is everything in the aesthetic. I don't know. Anyway, Izzy, sorry.
No. So you need to enunciate what you want to do. So one of the really good techniques is to like basically think of some verbs or nouns or whatever, adjectives. There we go. I'm a wordy person. So like, for example, hot scorching summer. And so like, I just demonstrated with a couple of photos of like what you can do with like the aesthetic of, it's like, and then like Firewatch could be example of a hot scorching summer. Or soft pastel dusk lighting, where it's like the same photo as before, but if you change the colors, it's a completely different feeling to the image. And so like soft pastels use a lot of like pinks and blues and like just this very like flat lighting kind of scheme. And one game that this demonstrates really well is Sunset. And then there's like also like cool neon reflective. I mean, you can make any words up that you want, but it's just like you just think of a bunch of words and it's like, what colors are they? And then so Last Night does it, and then this is just a color profile of Blade Runner, which is basically wet neon. Sorry. And so sometimes if you have no idea of what you want the aesthetic to be, you can just jam out like different colors, because I know like quite often I'm just like, I don't know what I want to do. But if you go to like just your baseline colors, they can each create a different tone. So like yellow is very warm, so it's like, do you want to have an inviting feeling, or do you want to paint poor Cam as a supervillain, or do you want to make her seem like at a disco party, or maybe even like on some kind of acid trip? I don't know. I'm sorry, Cam. And same with like this photo. So this is like just a generic raw photo. So the thing about photography is that it's literally the easiest art form. And I don't mean that to put myself down. It's literally the easiest. You like click a button and then that's your thing. You don't even have to get a piece of paper out. But the thing about photography is you have that one image and you can't change that image because you've taken it. And so it's like I generally edit my photos about like 6 months later, when I'm just like sitting in bed and super bored. I'm just like, I'm gonna edit a photo. And so I'll go on these train ships, I'll spam my camera, like take 10,000 shots, but I can't change any of the shots. So it's up to me to try and think of like an art style of like how I want to convey those photos, for example. So this is just the raw. This is like, if I was like putting it on Twitter, it'd be like, hey guys, I'm in this, I think it's in America, I think. I don't know where my photos are taken. I'm pretty sure this is on Train Jam. It's a very bad photo, but I could make it look like it was horror just by desaturating the image, increasing the tonal range for the highlights, and putting like a blue temperature. I could also make it like a washed out like cinema grade. So this was using like a her preset. But just a note, when you are trying to like grade things, it's very easy to go overboard. And so what you always want to avoid is to have a monochromatic color, unless that's that's what you want to convey. So you don't, unless you maybe want sepia or Grandma's China, try to have a lot of different aesthetics. And same, you can even just do with the black and white exposure levels. You can do overexposed, and each one of those have different moods. So whether you want to go for the Twin Peak vibe or the like, I'm on a ski trip, look at me vibes. You can do whatever one suits your aesthetic. I think this is yours.
Oh, okay. Right. Let's talk a little bit about my process. So get inspired is how I would start. Then I make something, and then I keep changing it until it's better and better and better. But I'm going to show you a little bit of how I made some of the decisions on my game, because I want you to all to understand how I got to where I am. There's really nothing magical about it. Start off with stealing ideas, right? Look out there for... What? Just try to find some really good ideas. Anyway, this here, this is my Pinterest board. And you'll see right up there it says Driving Horror Bible, 2,397 pins. I started that a couple of years ago, and I was just like, I want to further refine my asset reference, right? I don't know enough of the things inside of my head of what Americana looks like, of the kinds of lighting systems that I need, the kind of details that I need. So I'm just going to start using Pinterest for a little bit. And then I got addicted to it, and I was pinning stuff. All that. It's really, don't use Pinterest, but it's really good. And this is just a screen cap of it, but it's pages and pages of photos, great reference that I can use. This is some stuff that really inspired me. But what I find is really useful is as soon as you get beyond saying, I like this, start saying because, right? Start saying, I like this because, well, for me, this is hardcore pulp, right? This is from the 90s, and this was when doing retro stuff was peak. But doing the kind of retro stuff that you see here was peak. Pulp fiction was big, but also a certain kind of palette was huge. And also taking retro ideas, but the idea of the 50s housewife, and then making it gritty, making it realistic, making it earthy. Kind of like Mad Men, but in the 90s. I loved that, and I was just like, that's been a part of me. I wasn't inspired to make Dead Static Drive from this image, but this is the kind of visual library that I'm basing it on, you know? And then going back and looking at it, I got so many more ideas. I'm like, yes, I need to make sure I keep that. I love, what I find appealing about this is that there's a woman who shows some wonderful strength behind, and some anger behind that facade, right? I want to keep that in my game. Next, right? These games, these are huge inspirations for me. I looked at these when I was young and I thought, these are so different from everything else. Prince of Persia, the characters are so basic, but I feel like I can project myself onto that character in Prince of Persia more because they don't have a face. But also, I focus on the animation quality, and the animation quality was so high, and they could probably achieve that because the sprite detail level was so low. So I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to spend more time on my animations than my characters. Illustrations. And I looked at a lot of poster art, and I was like, poster art? Why don't more games do poster art? You know, the shadows shouldn't be black in my game. I want my shadows to be as bright as possible. I want to have different colors. I want to have, like this central image, that's by Max Temescu, I think. It's just an artist. It's gorgeous. I love that. It's an illustration for an article, or for a poem about drug use and about how you can kind of rot from within. I love that illustration, and it's so pink and so colourful and yet so grisly. It's wonderful. I want to do that, right? I've stolen all of this stuff, and I've stolen more than just this, but I've taken all of these different things and I've used them and incorporated them, right? And I've changed them, so it's different. William Eggleston. The chrome, right? My game has little chrome highlights on every car, on as many things as I can, because for me, I love that at certain kinds of lighting conditions, the chrome really stands out. I don't make it stand out like this. I made it stand out differently, but I still did that because I just love that element of it. I love these images because they're so dry and flat, apart from parts that are reflective and they pop.
So grading. Appropriation. So I do a lot of color grading, but what I kind of do is I get someone I try and evoke feelings, but someone else has already done the work for me. So for example, for this, I was just like, well, I'm in Dalesford and it's really, really miserable at the moment. So it's like sad Wes Anderson. So I used the 3:4 ratio, which Wes Anderson used in Grand Hotel Budapest, and he uses like a lot of like miniatures, especially in the skiing themes. So I basically did that, but just made it depressing because I never had live journal as a teen. So for another series, I did like 60s postcards because I think someone said my images were a little bit too postcardy for them, and so I just went, fuck you, I'm just going to make a whole bunch of postcards. Which was really fun because like in the 60s they used a lot of like deep blue and it's kind of been faded. So I had a lot of fun, I guess, trying to get the red and like kind of scrubbing it to make it look like a faded postcard. And then you'd be surprised because when film expires, it has a lot of magenta shadows. So it's like injecting a lot of magenta shadows, fading the greens, and then making that blue really dark and like poppy. And like that's the great thing is like when you know what you're looking for, you can very easily like Google search and find out exactly why the colors are the way they are. And like the different processes that like for printing and everything like that. And you basically like work from the theory. So for this one, I was just like, oh, this is like disposable cameras. Or like I looked at my images and I'm like, oh, this is like a snapshot of a journey. So I'll just make them look like a disposable camera. Except for maybe the last one, but I liked the last one, so I kept it in. I was back in Adelaide and two of my lovely, lovely friends took me on a road trip. So I was just like, I want to make disposable cameras to remember it. It was just a road trip to the forest, but no, the forest. And so then what I did for this series is I'm very trashy at my photography. So I had shitty like album covers, and so I basically made the first row look exactly like an album cover. And so what I did is I then, for the next three images, so these were like longing, and so I had like the color scheme based on this, which are two completely separate items, but the colors are quite similar. And then I made sure for the next three images, I only shifted the preset like by 3 stages. That way it keeps you consistent in all your like imagery, but it still gives a completely different look, but it is consistent. So I did 3 separate shifts. And then to make it not look as monochromatic, I also added some color shifts in there. So to add a bit of green and purple because they were just lost. And then for this one, I graded it like a Taraskovsky film meets the movie Her. So Andrei Taraskovsky, who did the film Stalker, so this was from Stugan. We were out wandering at midnight one night. So these were all taken at like 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. So a lot of post-processing has been added. So what Taraskovsky used is he used a film called Echochrome. He actually hated the color, but he managed to find a film that he liked. And this film had like a lot of very strong greens, and so that's what I really tried to bring out in the first row. And when you're color grading and when you're going from one color grading to another color grading, you have to have a kind of like transitional kind of section. And so what I did was I took elements from a lot of his other movies, especially like in Solaris, he does have some very muted reds. And I kind of combined them with the tones of Her. And so I made the transitional row just to link it all together. And then for the third row, because I thought in the film, it's like a kind of like, it's basically like one person, it's very centered about one person. So I thought, well, that's Spike Jonze's done all the work for me. Haha, I'm just gonna steal it like his colors. And so then so in the movie Her, the cinematographer was inspired by a Japanese photographer, Rinko, and I haven't got her name off the top of my head. But she basically she published like 3 books, and she does a lot of like very close-up objects. And so what I tried to do was I tried to make the images that I selected or chosen basically to be like very minimalist, very thing, which is a throwback to her like the original inspiration as well as just tinting everything. And if all else fails, use a lookup table.
Okay, so I'm going to bring this all back to video games because this is a games conference. A lot of the stuff that we've been talking about, not just what I've been talking about, but what Izzy's been talking about, I've used on my game, but also Izzy uses on her own games. I'm going to talk a little bit about this game, Dead Static Drive, and I'll show you, this is the game circa 2015? Yeah, 2015. This is what it looked like just after I sent it to Epic, and I'd been working on it for about 3 months or 4 months, and I was like, I reckon that I can demo this at GDC. I'm ready for that. I was not ready for that, but I shared a build with them, and they gave me an Epic Game grant because they needed to know about some games that were in development, and they were like, oh, well, we know about this game because he applied and he's not ready for GDC. But the game concept is really cool, and it's Grand Theft Cthulhu, which is like a great tagline. And they just believed in it, and so they gave me the grant, and they said, listen, we really believe in it, keep working hard on it. And so me, I've been working on so many game concepts while I was teaching, this to me was not a throwaway concept by any means, but it was still just something I was working on while I was teaching. I was like, oh, I could make a game. This is great. So I got some funding. And so this is what it looked like to start with. And this here is a night shot from outside. But what you can see here is that my original inspiration was really just, I wanted to do flat shading, kind of comic book style, I guess. But what I did is I just did either on or off lighting. Okay, so the way that a deferred renderer works, I don't want to go too technical because I know this is an art talk, but I'll talk a little bit technically. The way a deferred renderer works is it takes every 3D model and all of the textures, all that data, and it pumps them out into a bunch of different canvases. Ooh, excuse me. It pumps them into a bunch of different canvases. Okay, so it's painting one canvas that just has the base color. One canvas says this is how rough the objects are, this is how metallic the objects are. And all of these canvases, once they're painted separately, a single pass goes over the entire game and then combines them all. And that's where the lighting gets applied. And that's where all of those decisions on whether an object's lit or not, whether it's in shadow, whether it's got any ambient lighting, all of those decisions get made at the one point at the end. So if you're going to be lazy like me, or like anyone else who wants to be indie and be smart, get in and edit the deferred renderer, because then you only need to do it once. Okay? So if you're working on a project and you're an artist and you want to make a new style, then rather than using like Shader Forge or Unreal's Material Editor, I barely use Unreal's Material Editor now. I don't need to because I wrote them once. The deferred render has changed, and now if I just drop an asset into a game, it will use this lighting. Okay? But there were a lot of issues with it. So what I did is I came back and I reworked it, and this is what it looks like circa 2017. That's this week. The colors are all slightly changed. Nighttime shouldn't be too different from what it used to be, but I think it's more cohesive. It's all pulled together a little bit more. There's more warmth. There's more coolness outside in the dark, and there's more warmth when you're inside. But part of the reason it looks like that is because in the interim, I decided to make it day-night cycle for the game, and daylight looked terrible using the style that I originally came up with. It was just stark and boring, and I showed it to some people and they just lost interest. So I spent a lot of time working on that, and so now I've got daytime. Okay, this is dawn, and that's early morning, just late morning, I don't know, 11 o'clock or something. And it's warm and it's inviting and it feels safe and it feels cozy and it feels different and it feels pretty, right? And to get that feeling, this is just, I'm going to do some post-processing on this image just to show you the kind of thing that I do in the game. It's really easy to do. I just take an existing image from the game and I use a lookup table, okay? A very huge amount of this image here, I mean, it doesn't look good. I'm not saying this looks good. It's nothing compared with what Izzy does, right? Izzy is an artist. I'm just doing a shit video game thing here with a photo. It's pulling a lot of the colors to warmer at the high end, and it's pulling colors towards cooler at the darker end, right? This is what I'm doing. This is my layer stack for Dead Static Drive. So what I do is I start off with my initial image, I desaturate the shadows, okay, and then I brighten the entire image. Okay, once I've done that, I desaturate the midtones again, because I find that if I desaturate the midtones afterwards, then I get some extra values that weren't previously desaturated. Sorry, I'm very hand talker, so normally I'm over here when I'm talking. And then once I've done that, I apply a gradient map. This is really embarrassing. I feel bad. This is like exposing my nudity. What I do is I take every dark color in my game and I make it more purple. every bright color, I make it warmer, okay? That's it, right? And magically, nighttime is cool and daytime is warm, okay? It's really easy to do, and you just do it once, and you apply that lookup table to everything in your game, and suddenly everything has that look. It looks different. You want to make a game that looks like my game, please do this. It looks really good. Just use a different gradient, please. That's my gradient. TM, Mike Blackney. Okay, so I did that, and immediately everything suddenly started looking different. This is a nighttime shot using that same lighting system, but using the lookup table, right? But at night, one thing that I really wanted with this game is I wanted to take every value that's lower than maybe 25% brightness and crunch them all to the same color. So shadows would be shadows, right? Like they would encompass you. As soon as a shadow fell on something, even just a slight amount of one, you wouldn't be able to see anything. I thought, this is great. This is a cool poster style. People played the game, they couldn't see anything. So it's not playable anymore, right? I can't see. So what I did is I made a trade-off. Okay, and I came up with a new aesthetic. It's through compromising. Basically what I said is, well, when it's dark and I'm going for a walk late at night, I can see things that are near me. They're easier to make out because of optics and because of the way the human eye works and everything like that. I can't do that, right? I don't have enough time to do like accurate optics in a video game and have it so that distant objects need to have more contrast in them and have more brightness in them. I can't do all that, but what I can do is I can just lighten everything that's near you, right? And just constantly try to look at what I'm doing as I'm doing it and say, is it still appealing? As soon as it didn't become appealing, I toned it back, I changed the color. And so what I've got here, the difference between this and this, is everything that's near you gets a series of colors applied to it. Okay, based on whether the normals are facing upwards or downwards, it either gets a skylight or a bounce light applied to it, okay? And that's only in a limited radius around your character. But as soon as I added that, you could see stuff near you, but everything further away was creepier. And so I said, well, fine, let's run with it. Let's take that concept and make it work for me. It's a horror game. So I pulled the radius in even more when it's raining, when it's miserable, when it's meant to be scary, and you can see even less of it. And the benefit is that now I had a new aesthetic, right? During the daytime, you could see everything that was near you in a much larger radius and it felt safer. And so suddenly I had a dynamic. I had a new mechanic in my game and the aesthetic was my own. It was no longer the poster style that I originally got inspired by. I wasn't stealing this. This was mine. It wasn't what I originally wanted, but it was mine, right? And so when I show this game, now I feel proud because I'm like, that thing is mine. I know not necessarily everyone's here to see that, but that's mine. Another demo. I'm going to do another quick demo really quickly because this is for people who are interested in maths and coming up with cool, crazy stuff. A lot of you probably don't. Let's prove it's not magic, right? So I love these. I love old ads for cars because of the way they made the cars look. They were so shiny, but they were so ugly. And the way that reflections work here, the way that reflections work in the real world, or this is the real world. This is not the real world. This is a specially mocked up photo to look as shiny as possible for an advertisement. But when we play a game at home, we want it to look pretty. And this is what looks pretty, right? So I love how these specular highlights have hard edges in places and soft fades in other places. So I said, I want to do that, right? Gorgeous. And they're so happy because it's so reflective, right? This here is the Blinn lighting system that's built into a lot of older engines, and it's the foundation for, this is specular lighting, right? This is specular lighting that you'd apply in an old like PS3 game. New games don't use that, they use microfacet, BIDF stuff. Ask your technical artists and they'll say, I don't know, I stole it from someone on SIGGRAPH. But this is what specular lighting used to look like, and I said, that doesn't look right to me. Right? So first thing I did is I said, well, let's make it comic book lighting, all right? And let's just say if it's greater than a certain threshold, it's white, otherwise it's black, right? Which looked great for a little while. I kept it like that. But then this is 90% of my cases, because my game's an isometric game, 90% of the cases in the game, I'd see just a tiny specular highlight. And I'd be like, I can't see it. I want to be able to see how shiny that car is, right? Ugh. What I wanted was this, right? All right, so this here is what it looks like, and this. I wanted to have it so that no matter what kind of glancing angle, you'd still see some sort of specular highlight, but you'd also be able to see hard edges, all right? So what do? Okay, well, this here is the maths, okay? This is the maths for how regular specular works. On the left, you'll see that we've got a surface normal, which is pointing straight up. We've got a vector that's pointing towards the light source. We've got a vector that's pointing towards the viewer, who is the bunny in this instance. And then we've got that green vector, which is called the half vector, the H, right? So basically what we do to get the H, what we do is we get the orange and the purple, and we average them. That gets the one right in the middle, okay? And then we do the dot product of that and the surface normal. It's maths, oh my God. Basically, the dot product, it's just a way of saying, if I've got two directions, are they pointing close to each other? It'll give you a 1. Are they pointing away? That'll give you a -1. Or are they pointing like this? That'll give you a 0, right? It's just a special maths thing, right? But it tells us if they're pointing close, it'll be bright, pointing away, it'll be dark. And that's how lighting works in games. And so all we do is we work out where the viewer is, what the surface direction is, where the light source is, and we've got all of the information that we need. I didn't do that. But what I did is I sat back and I thought, okay, how would I be able to get this kind of thing? You know, long highlights like you see at sunset, beautiful, long, off the water, and you're like, I'm sipping margaritas and it's a good time. And I just thought for a long time on how I could do that. And I was like, look, if I can get this, if I can find out some way, if I've got a sphere, to work out a stripe that just circles that sphere, all I need is the maths to do that, and then I can work it out from there. I'll do a threshold on it, and I'll do some quirky shit. Thankfully, I'm really old, and I've worked on something like that before. This is a slide from SIGGRAPH 2004. This is Kajaya K specular for anisotropic and anisotropic hair highlights, right? So a lot of video games you might see, they have this kind of hair highlight, right? This is, you might know Ben Mathis, poop in my mouth from Polycount. This is his 3D model, that's not mine. But a few years back, we were talking on Polycount, and I'm just like, I reckon I could make a cool hair shader. I'm just going to edit the shader that everyone was using at the time to make a version that works with hair. And look at this. This is basically what I'm talking about, right? This is the ring that goes around. The maths was slightly different for me because I had to change it, but that's the foundation. I'm like, it's brilliant, Mike, you're a genius. You can do this. So what I did is I came up with this. Okay, this is my function. Feel free to use it. Okay, I'm not precious about it. It's going to look different. And I'll share this as well on Twitter, so please follow me on Twitter and you can get all my stuff. This looks really complicated, but it's not. It's a two-stage process, okay? First thing that we have to do is this, okay? This is how we get that dark stripe down the middle, okay? What I'm doing is not a dot product. To start with, I'm doing a special other kind of maths called a cross product. Okay, so for anyone here who doesn't know what that is, or who doesn't know what a dot product is, right? A dot product tells us are things pointing in the same direction. A cross product, if you have two arrows, the cross product will give you an arrow that's orthogonal to them, right? That's a really goofy word. Basically, treat any two arrows like it's a plane, an airplane, and whichever direction my head's pointing, that's the orthogonal one, right? It's the one pointing off the surface, right? Yeah, anyway. So I do the cross product. What I do is I say, okay, if I'm looking this way and the lighting's looking this way, the cross product will give me left or right, okay? I can use that to work out if the surface normal is pointing in the same direction. So the sides of the car are and the top of the car is not. That gives me the stripe. And then I take the stripe and I just invert it. So I turn all the black to white and I threshold it and it gives me that, right? And it's not too complicated. All it took is being 40, having done the exact perfect maths before one time. And that's the final version, right? Yeah, so in conclusion, be old, be me, luckily do something, I don't know.
And zoom out for all the thumbnails of your game. And then if they don't match, just add a LUT.
There you go. Thank you. There you takeaways. So I think we've got time for a little bit of questions, little tiny bit of questions, if anyone's wanted to throw a question.
Oh, Marvin!
G'day. How do you get word art in the using of the
There's a website! Yeah, it's even got Clippy.
Yes.
Why on the aesthetic of Drive, to say Drive, did you choose to not use a ramp texture for your lighting there?
Oh, that's a really good question. I just didn't. No. Well, because it's cheaper. It's cheaper if I don't. If I just use on or off in the deferred renderer, it applies to everything, and I don't need to have an extra texture lookup. But then I do use a ramp texture in my post process, which is how I get that lookup table working. Yeah.
What's your favourite Curtis Russell?
The Thing. Yeah, but Soldier I especially love because it exists, because Kurt Russell is a bad actor and he has charisma, and that's the only reason he has a career. And some brilliant genius said, oh my God, imagine taking Kurt Russell and having him not talk for 90% of the movie. Wouldn't that be wonderful? He can just act. And I'm like, no, he can't act. Yeah.
You've talked about the pulp from the 90s, how it was like recycling 50s imagery. Do you think games will eventually recycle imagery which emerges out of its creators?
Oh.
And if so, do you imagine that's going to happen in 30 years, or because of tech, do you think that will happen almost instantaneously?
Yeah, I think it's happening today. I think that like Andy Sum's game is a good example of that happening already, but also because of the dearth of ideas. Until there's another enormous cataclysmic revolution, like I reckon, this is speaking outside of my speciality, but I think that most styles, we keep seeing the 70s come back, the 80s come back, the 90s come back, right? The 90s are coming back now. Right, like the 90s were just the 70s.
It's
like,
was that 2000s?
Yeah,
Shit.
it's like there's nothing to come back. The society needs to fall before we don't do retro anymore. For a little bit, and then we can do retro.
Then we'll just go back to zombies.
Any more questions? Yes.
What motivated the aesthetic design choices for the presentation itself for you? And I'm not talking about this slide. Everything before it.
So it was really hard to find a good font in Google Chrome, whatever the PowerPoint thing.
Google Docs.
Yeah.
Slides,
And so that's why I kind of I just spaced it out because I didn't want it to make it look like a font that everyone's seen before, because it is Google, so everyone uses the same fonts.
Yeah.
And then I just made it stark monochrome because I knew that we were going to have a lot of pictures.
Yeah. Plus, you can always be stylish if you're wearing black and white. As soon as you wear something, I'm wearing denim, and it's like, no, guys, we stopped wearing that 6 months ago.
Oh, one at the back.
How do you know, I feel like aesthetic and art direction and the bottom as well, some people are just never happy with style and sort of keep doing it forever. How do you sort of reach the point where you're like, okay, right, this is what it's going to be? Were you always constantly sort of iterating?
I think you launched the game. Yeah. The last time I edited I don't know about Izzy, but the last time I edited my shaders, my basic shader, the deferred renderer, to make everything in the game look different, was 2 days ago.
Yeah, I was gonna say I rejig the lighting all the time, and Shuri, who is here now, yay! But she hates me for that, going, oh, I moved all the lightings. Whoops, I accidentally baked all the vertexes in the same thing. Whoops.
Yeah. And I'm pretty strict on myself now because I know that I will keep changing them. So I've basically said to myself, look, people have bought into the game as it looks now, not the game as, well, Mike, you're a bit tired of it and you want something different. So I'm trying to restrict myself to only small changes. I'm kind of using the thermal search decision, which is like at the start of a project, you can jump randomly in big amounts. And then as the project gets closer and closer to its end, you should jump smaller distances and smaller distances until you get right near the end of the project, and then any changes should be small. So basically, start of the project, do big things, keep changing everything, like go crazy. And as soon as people start responding and saying, I like this, then shrink the amount you're allowed to jump and shrink it and shrink it. And every time that people say, spot on, I like that, just shrink it. And then just keep within a certain field. But I don't follow that advice.
Oh, I think that's time out.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.